Have you ever thought about how your own psychological functions impact the very way that you perceive reality? I was just walking by and saw this river, which I thought would be a great example. Let me show you here. So, simple question. Can you step in the same river twice? I know this is a quote many of you have heard before. I believe it comes from Heraclides. I might be butchering his name there a little bit. But it's an important question because it gets at the heart of how we perceive things. Most people would say yes, of course you can step in the same river twice. But is it really? That's the deeper question. Someone who looks at reality in a bit of a different way would say that you can never step in the same river twice because there is no such a thing as a singular river. That's just a label we give to a certain pattern of reality that we can readily recognize. If we say river, that's a type of label that we give. River is a body of water. It has certain characteristics, certain patterns, and when we recognize that, we will say that's a river. Now, someone who sees things more so from an interconnected nature, from the side where things are always in a state of change, they will say that the substrates that you are classifying as a river are always in a state of change. So, other than seeing a label that you've created with your own mind, the actual reality that's underlying that label seems to always be in a state of change. So how could you ever step in that same set of substrates, or river as we call it, twice? Seems like a bit of a nuance, kind of like splitting hairs, but it gets a little bit deeper than that because we see this pattern in many clinical disorders as well. Common example, anxiety disorders. We see in cognitive behavioral therapies, people have certain cognitive distortions, as we like to call them. These are biases and thinking patterns that are afflicted by one's way of thinking. And for someone who has an anxiety disorder, their way of thinking pertaining to reasoning with emotions, that tends to be dominant. And if it's a disorder, then it's dominant to the point that what they're experiencing is causing clinically significant distress. So if a situation comes up, their first reaction might be to turn to catastrophic outcomes. This is going to go horribly wrong. This is going to fail. All of this is going to go bad. They might even have a panic attack. But in actuality, what's going on is much, much different. That's just what their mind jumps to in terms of processing. So when we go through therapy, we start to address these issues. We might do something like an exposure therapy or other types of approaches where they get to reality test some of these biases that their minds are constructing. Is it really true that you're going to have a panic attack as soon as you go into the grocery store because you had one before? Maybe, maybe not. We should reality test it. And once you do that, you start to, I would call it, calibrate your mind more so to how reality operates. In a similar vein, for awakening, it's difficult to see what awakening is about from how we typically carry out our psychological functions. Most people would say that, yes, indeed, you can step in the same river twice because that is the river, and because that is one river, I can step in there, I can step out, and I can step back in. It's the same river. Now, when we learn to view things from a different perspective, as I was talking about earlier, seeing things as interconnected, always in a state of change, interdependent. But is that necessarily the correct answer? Well, again, it depends on what class of psychological functions you are using. So the bottom line here is, can you step in the same river twice? Truly, it depends on your psychological functions. The answer is yes and no. And as we always say in psychology, it depends. I also wanted to add that there is no true, correct way to perceive reality, because for all of us, we all have a very small sliver of how we can interpret information. So what matters most is being able to take the data from your psychological functions and utilize that in a way that's most important for yourself. Many people out there might say that awakening is not the most important step for them. They might look at something completely different. Again, it depends on the goals that you have in mind. Very important to remember this, because we often get caught in our own way of thinking and forget that our way of thinking is shaped by our desires, our thoughts, and our wants. So we should keep those underlying factors in check to make sure that our thinking patterns fall in line in a way that's important and useful for how we want to live out our life.